Patrick Martin, Chairman of the Midtown CAC. Welcome to everyone for coming out this evening. We start the evening by going around the room and having everybody introduce themselves and the neighborhood in which they live. So if we could please start right up here to my right.
Ladies first.
Speak up.
Yeah. This is Albans, and I guess we live.
Farrington?
Farrington? No.
Camelot Drive? What's that?
On Camelot Drive?
Yeah.
I don't know. What would people
It is
say?
started with F.
Yeah, don't remember.
Ferry, not Ferrier Hills, that's
Yeah.
like
Ferrier Hills?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's
All right.
Yeah.
Well, very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Not Moji, but
Okay, great.
Same house.
I hope you'll come back.
Yes.
Ted?
Ted Kinsler, Spring Valley.
Mike Ladder, Brad Creek, Lugan, Travat, Hickory Hills, Stan Steger, North Hills,
Larry Humpon, Hickory Hill.
Bill Gilmore, North Hills.
Jack Safran, St. Albans.
Jen Foster, Crabtree Heights.
Jonathan Edwards, City Raleigh Community Engagement Division.
This table.
John Freeman, we're North Hills Place, my wife Pat.
Hi.
Matt Smith, North Hills. George Hart, North Hills. Jim LeClaire, City of Raleigh, Code Enforcement.
Karen Solari, Hickory Hills.
John Stone, North Hills.
Jean Smith, Hickory Hills.
Bill Smith, Hickory Hills.
Maxine Bobby Lakemont.
Carolyn Sexton, Hickory Hills. Susan Don, Lakemont. Nancy Breeding, North Glen.
Richard Dubois, Lakemont.
David Jones, Anderson Forest.
Susan Adams, Parks Recreation, Cultural Resources.
Peggy Ray, Anderson Forest.
Dwight Otwell, North Hills. Patrick Buffkin, Pinecrest.
Leslie Saunders, Ridgelock.
Jason Hardin with the City Planning Department, and I live in Cameron Village.
Manuel Lopez, City of Raleigh with the Public Utilities Department.
Jessica Foster,
Okay. And our policeman.
Michael Taylor, Johnson County. Paul Pettit, also Johnson.
All right, great. Thank you all for coming. So the next thing we need to do is please look over the minutes that are attached to your agenda. I'll give you a couple of minutes to go over the minutes and let me know if you see anything that needs correcting, elaboration, or whatever. Okay, everybody getting through the minutes? I know it's a lot to cover in a couple of minutes, but you do know if you're signed up for My Raleigh subscriptions, you get this in advance so that you can take a look at the agenda and look at the minutes that get sent out with the agenda. So has anybody never heard of My Raleigh subscriptions? Okay, so you've all heard of it, so I hope that you are all signed up to get the Midtown CAC newsletter in advance. If you have not signed up, it's very easy to do. You go onto the City of Raleigh website, You can just go up to the search box at the top and put in My Raleigh Subscriptions. You're gonna see dozens, if not hundreds, of entries. It includes things like the Planning Commission meetings and the Board of Adjustment meetings and all the City Council committee meetings. You can sign up to be notified of any of those things, but of course the thing that you need most to sign up for is the Midtown CAC notifications. So please do that if you have not done that already. Any comments, questions, suggestions, corrections on the minutes? Okay, then do I hear a motion to accept the minutes as written?
So moved.
Jack, thank you. A second?
Second.
All right, George, thank you. It's been moved and seconded to accept the minutes from the last meeting as written. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, great. The minutes are accepted. All right, we'll go on to the Raleigh Police Department report, and we have our Officer Pettit here. So happy to have the same person 3 months in a row.
Thanks, Patrick. You all make it easy, though, I will say that. You started off right with the potluck dinner, and that kept me here. So. Anybody go to the State Fair this week? It was crazy a couple of days. I know I did. And just to keep true to stereotype, I got a couple donuts, so.
Was Raptor Ranch fried chicken?
No. That's weird. I'm not eating one like that. Well, I've got a couple of numbers for you to go over, and they'll be in the newsletter for next month. I've already provided them up front. So these numbers are going to cover from September 23rd, which is the date of the last CAC here, through today. These numbers are ran today. So during that month, we had no homicides. There were no murders in this area, which was good, obviously. We had no commercial burglaries reported here as well. We had 2 residential burglaries, which was up from 1 the month before that. In those 2 cases, they were both down near Marlowe Road and Drummond Road. One was a side door was kicked, an alarm was tripped. Nothing was stolen from that particular location. It looked like the alarm had spooked them off. And the other one, I didn't have any information from the report. It hadn't been submitted yet, as it was just occurred yesterday. So I'll keep an eye on those. Motor vehicle thefts, we had 4 reported this month instead of 3 from the month before that. Kind of keeping up the trend from the last few CACs that I provided this information. It seems to still be following the same kind of trend. In one of the cases, the victim left the keys actually in the door, made it kind of difficult. That vehicle was recovered though. I had no information on another one. North Hills, there was one vehicle that was stolen. However, those keys were stolen in a previous vehicle break-in. So there's a good chance it was the same person that came back for that car later. And another one of those 4 turned out just to be a vehicle towed by a towing company, and it wasn't reported yet. So really we had 3. Simple assaults, we were down a little bit. We had 11 the month before that. We had 9 this month. 7 out of those 9 were known suspects, where the victims, suspect and victims were known, mostly domestic related issues. And we had 9 vandalism reports instead of 6. And 6 of those 9 had known suspects with a personal vendetta of some kind, so they didn't really seem to be a random trend. We actually had 0 commercial robberies. We had 2 reported strong arm robberies. Both were in the Steinbeck area, where it seems likely that it's the same suspect. They happened back-to-back days, and cell phones and a small amount of cash were stolen in each of those cases. Still working on suspect information in that one. We had 6 reported drug violations. 3 of those resulted from traffic stops. 2 of them reported from one single incident at the extended stay hotel, and one of them was just found property. So somebody found some drugs laying around and reported that one. We had 6 reported DWIs, which was up from 1 the month before that. Doing a little bit of work in that area on our part. Larceny from building, we had 1 this month as opposed to 3 from the month before that. In this case, it was several laptops stolen from an apartment complex business center, just during regular business hours. Somebody came in and swiped some laptops. Larceny from vehicles, I know we hit on this one a lot too. This was up a little bit from the month before. We had 9 this month, which was up from 7. similar things stolen. We had stolen wallets, cash, smartphones, laptops, several guns, and one was a license plate stolen. In 3 of those cases, the vehicles were unlocked, and 4 of those cases, the valuables were in plain view. They weren't even trying to hide anything. One of those 9 was actually an attempted break-in. They didn't actually make entry, but it still gets reported to us as a vehicle break-in. We had 1 incident of shots fired. There were no victims. That investigation was unfounded. That was on North Hills Drive on October 14th. And we had 0 reports of disorderly conduct. So that's pretty much it for the numbers. Just a reminder again, try not to leave your valuables in your car, whether it's in sight or out of sight. Just don't leave them in there. It's not a secure location. And again, with the holidays coming up, I touched on this a little bit last month with online, protecting yourself with shopping online and in stores. Try to be mindful as well of telephone scams around this time of year as well. There's a lot of calls about IRS calling, saying that you owe money and they're going to arrest you and come to your door. I promise you, we will not, the Sheriff's Department will not, Highway Patrol doesn't, IRS does not. We don't operate that way. If you owe money, they have other ways of doing that. They're not going to threaten you. They're not going to threaten you over the phone to do it. So if you get any phone calls like that, you're not obligated to talk to them. Just hang up. Okay? Any questions about anything that I went over yet? Wow. All right. Well, good to see you all. We will see you all again next month, okay? All right. Take care, guys.
Okay, Susan, Parks and Recreation.
Hey, I'm Susan Adams. I'm with the Parks Department. I work at Optimus Community Center. And I'm just here to give you guys some updates of what's coming up. And our center's basketball registration just ended, so we're going to be all running basketball programs starting within the next week and running until the end of January, middle of February. Depends on if one of our sites is a voting site or not. I know we closed down for February for our gym does, because it turns into an election site. So we got to get our basketball done early. Some other things going around in the parks that you guys may be interested in. This weekend there's a Pullen and Tacoma Art Centers have their fall arts fair that's going to be held at Fred Fletcher Park. That's this Saturday from 10 to 5. So there will be a lot of artists selling things out there. You can start your holiday shopping early if you need to. The Santa's Trolley is going to be at Morikee Historic Park on December 13th and the 15th. So that's, a different kind of holiday experience. And Morikee is also going to be offering open house tours on December 14th and the 15th. So you can see what the houses and rooms decorated through the World War II era look like, decorated for the holidays. And then lots of our sites around the city have little small holiday events for families and kids. If you are interested, all of our information is listed online, and they usually, our marketing department lists all the holiday stuff together. So also, there's going to be a Fall for Raleigh Parks photo contest. Fall is finally here, and it's the perfect time to enjoy the Raleigh Parks. You're going to snap a photo of your fall adventures, and then you tag at Raleigh Parks, and there's going to be a photo contest. And the photo with the most votes by Monday, December 2nd at 5 o'clock will win. And also be mindful that during the holidays, some of the parks and facilities may close or have modified hours. Be sure to visit the website for more details. And the upcoming public meetings for the Parks, Recreation, and Greenway Advisory Board meets the third Thursday of the month at 6 o'clock. And just reference with the meeting minutes, and I talked with Patrick about this earlier, the North Hills Playground Build Day, it didn't happen because of the rain and weather, that we finally got rain. That seems what always works whenever playground that I'm involved in always happens. Didn't rain for a while, then finally it rained last week and prevented that from being a community build. But we're looking forward to whenever that is going to have a dedication, and we're going to find out that date soon, so you all can come out and be a part of that. Anybody have any
Question
questions?
about your third Thursday of the month, your parks.
The third Thursday of the month is the Parks, Recreation, and Greenway Advisory Board meeting. Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Okay, community engagement. Jonathan.
Alright, so community engagement does not have much of anything to report this meeting, but the RCAC, paired and coordinated with RTN, the Raleigh Television Network, and put together a CAC promotional video, and I just wanted to share that with y'all tonight.
The Citizen Advisory Councils serve as the link between the residents of Raleigh and city government. If you live in Raleigh, you're automatically a member of one of these councils. The city of Raleigh has 18 CACs, each representing a different geographic region of the city. Each CAC elects its own officers and decides its own activities and priorities. You can attend as an individual, or you can represent your neighborhood-based organization at your CAC meetings. All meetings are open to everyone. However, you can only vote at meetings of the CAC where you reside. CACs are nonpartisan. They're the only advisory boards to the City Council not appointed by the Council. Raleigh's CACs are a connecting point between municipal government and residents. They provide a way for the city to share information about government activities and to receive feedback from the community. Through CACs, residents and neighborhood groups participate in decisions directly affecting them. For instance, CACs have a voice in planning and development issues. Most proposals for rezoning property go before a local CAC for review. Often a person seeking rezoning will appear before the CAC to discuss the proposal. Each CAC holds regular meetings and everyone is welcome to attend. The meetings provide a forum to share information about neighborhood improvement plans and other neighborhood issues. City council members sometimes attend CAC meetings to talk about items before the council. City staffers often appear at CAC meetings to give updates on projects or discuss how the city can assist with different services each department offers. Police representatives usually attend to discuss crime trends and offer crime prevention tips. All neighborhood-based organizations, such as neighborhood and homeowner associations, are encouraged to send representatives to CAC meetings and share information about the CAC proceedings with their members. It's important that every neighborhood have representation at CAC meetings because broader input leads to better decision-making.
Okay. Well, Jonathan, that is a great introduction for people to know something about CACs. Is that like a file that can be sent to people to take to?
It's already on our Facebook.
Well, great, thank you. I was thinking in terms of.
It's up there if you want to see it.
Great.
You watch it 10 times.
So anybody can get a copy of this file to. I'm thinking in terms of people who are here that are members of like church association boards and Rotary Club and stuff like that. If they would want to take it to a meeting and present it, for the population in their group, I think this is a great way of communicating the CAC existence, So this is something somebody can just get a hold of?
I got it off of, I'm sure I got it off of Raleigh's website, the city of Raleigh's website.
Oh.
I just put it on our
Okay.
page. But they can search videos under our page. And
Okay.
it's there.
All right.
On Facebook.
Too big to email.
It's too big to email? Okay, but it can be downloaded from the city website?
I'm not sure
Okay.
how that goes.
It's on Facebook. You
It's,
can just-
it's on it's on what? On
the
our
Midtown
Facebook page?
Citizens Advisory Council Facebook page.
Okay,
If you go, you open it, and you'll see a link on the left for videos. You click on videos, and it's under there.
even if you don't do Facebook, you can have access
that
to
might
it?
be problematic, Patrick.
How many here are on Facebook?
You'll have to find
1,
somebody
2,
who has a
3,
Facebook
4,
account.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and half of you are city employees.
It's always on my desktop, so if somebody wants to bring a thumb drive next meeting, you're more than welcome to take a copy of it.
Okay, great. So you heard that. If you want to get a copy, you can get it off of his laptop, which he brings to each meeting. But I just think that's a great thing to share with other organizations that you may belong to, you know. So.
Or if you have a thumb drive at night.
It may be on YouTube. I just don't wanna say that because I can't. I don't know that I definitely didn't get it off of YouTube. I got it off of the City of Raleigh website, for sure.
Well, great. Thank you. So if you want a copy, you can ask up here, you can ask back there, you know. But that to me was a great little video. So, okay, code enforcement.
Good evening, everybody. I don't have a whole lot to report. The neighborhoods.
It's on, just get it up to your face.
Really? Can you guys hear me like this? Because I prefer this. Oh, okay. All right, no problem. Normally I have a very strong voice. I don't really have a whole lot to report this evening. Just a couple reminders about the leaves. I am starting to see a lot more of that on the road. Please keep it in the right-of-way section. They'll pick it up. Try to please keep it off the road. In addition to that, as far as case numbers go, I'm running about average for this time of year. So everything is kind of, we stopped slowing down, we're starting to pick back up a little bit. With that being said, the only other thing I have is I received a disturbing phone call this evening, just before I came down here. I received a phone call that stated that somebody was impersonating a government official, meaning my department, meaning me, okay? So I want to kind of go over a few things that'll happen if I do a citation on your property. All right, one is it will have a City of Raleigh logo on whatever the citation is that I leave, okay? It's usually a yellow or green, about this kind of color right here, paper. It has the City of Raleigh logo on it, has a list of violations on it. On the back it has an area for me to write notes. I put the notes on there. In addition to that, it will have my signature on it, my printed name, and my phone number, okay? If you get anything that is handwritten, that is not on our letterhead, meaning the City of Raleigh logo, please notify me as soon as you can, okay? I will come by, I'll pick it up, and I'll get it to the authorities that it needs to go to. Impersonating a government official can be a serious crime, okay? With that being said, I'm hired to do a job. I do that job pretty well, okay? If you guys have any issues with anybody, please go through me, okay? I'm an inspector. I've done building for 20 years prior to becoming an inspector, okay? So I know what I'm doing in that aspect. I know how the permit process is. I know how the public nuisance process is for our department, everything else. That's what my job is, okay? I know the proper channels, and I will help you guys get whatever information you need, or go and cite the people that need to be cited. That's what I'm hired to do, okay? Please do not take it upon yourself to write a letter to somebody, impersonate a government official, and tell them what they're doing is incorrect. The person that they happen to write this letter to had all the permits they needed and was fully in compliance of what we do for building, okay? There is a lot of building that is going on in the neighborhoods, a lot of new construction going on. You're gonna see a lot more of it as we progress and we grow, okay? If you have a concern about somebody not having any permits, call me, call my department. That's what I'm supposed to do. I will go out if they do not have the permits. I will put a stop work order on their property. I will make sure that that work stops. If they don't stop, that's a misdemeanor, okay? All right, they need to conform with what I'm asking them to do, all right? So please don't take it upon yourself to tell them to stop working or do any of that kind of stuff, all right? Does anybody have any questions in regards to that? Okay, all right, there we go. We'll go, your hand was up first, so we'll go with you.
Well, I have a question, it's a personal issue of, the builder is constructing a house uphill from mine, cleared off the lot, put the house up. The silt fence was not properly installed, and a sea of mud walked across my backyard and has left a lot of mud there. And I've talked to the city inspector several times, and my expectation has been that he will remedy the damage to my backyard, but nothing has happened yet. What
Call
will
me
happen?
tomorrow, give me your information, I will go out there and I'll get the proper department.
I've already talked to the right department, I think that is.
If you went to inspections, it wasn't the right department. Inspections doesn't handle the silt fence.
Okay.
They can, the silt fence, what they can do is they can hold up inspections or they can, attach inspection fees to that, but that's not the proper department. A different department actually handles the actual silt fence. Okay? So I'll get your information and I'll make sure I handle that personally.
Thank you.
Okay? Yes, sir.
Leaves are a sore subject from year to year.
I know they
What
are.
are the city plans, for them, for the city or their subcontractors to pick up leaves on what kind of frequency?
Okay, if you go to the, Raleigh website, raleighNC.gov, okay? You can look under leaf collection, and they have all the areas listed of when they're supposed to be picking everything up. If they do not follow through with on the date that they need to pick it up, there's a number for you to call. Okay, call that number and say, hey, you guys aren't here, what's going on, and find out if they changed the date. And then they will let you know what the new date is, okay? Sometimes they get behind. I know, I think last year, at its worst, I think they were 2.5 weeks behind. Okay?
It's generally 2 per season.
Typically it's 2 per season. Okay? If they miss it, you know, if it's their fault, they will come back by and do that extra special stop, but typically it's 2 per season. Okay? Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. We have two different special guests this evening. One is Manuel Lopez from Public Utilities, and so we're going to turn it over to him right now to talk about various issues with water, sewer, stormwater, etc.
Absolutely, thank you, Mr. Patrick and Susan, thank you for the opportunity. Hope everybody's doing wonderful today. My name is Emmanuel Lopez with Public Utilities with the Sewer Maintenance Division. I understand there's certain subjects that need to be addressed of vital importance today, so I'll be mindful and try to address my presentation as soon as possible. So definitely, I'm with Public Utilities Department, the Sewer Maintenance Division. It's a great opportunity for us, which we appreciate to be here. It's been a year since we were here the last time. We have a second message this time. The first time was a meet and greet, introduce the department with Public Utilities and explain what exactly Public Utilities, the Sewer Maintenance Division, actually does. And we talk about how many miles of sewage do we have in the system, which is over 2,500 miles of sewage in the ground. Over 85,000 manholes we have in the system. We serve approximately 500,000 customers. We serve Wendell, Knightdale, Rollinsville, Zebulon, Wake Forest, Garner, and of course, definitely Raleigh. A couple of few things that I really would like to reinforce a little bit during this presentation. It's two things in particular. One would be the what is the homeowner's responsibility according to what we see in the ground when it comes to sewage, and the other one, main important topics for us, which would be disposable wipes. That one I think is not a very good statement. I would not encourage anything to be disposed into sewage itself. Those wipes do not disintegrate, so eventually they will be catched within your service main or within the city of Raleigh, definitely. So normally we got two underground systems. One is a sanitary sewer pipe to the wastewater treatment plant. So normally that's a confined space entry. That's all the sewer from properties, residential, commercial areas. They go to the wastewater treatment plant, and eventually at one point they are released into the Neuse River. The other one, it's a stormwater system, which it collects rainfall flow into storm drains and streams. So you might be able to see some storm drains, some catch basins, everything that goes in the street eventually feeds into that. It goes to a blue line stream, creek, and directly to the Neuse River. There we got a picture of what some of the storm drains look like. That's a picture of a manhole, how it ties into in the bottom from different service lines coming from different directions. Private collection system, it's a home plumbing fixtures, back water valves, service cleanouts, private sewer laterals, sewer service connections, everything, absolutely everything that comes from the property, the entire service until it connects with a city pipe. So I'll have a picture visualized of how they both merge together. This was a public collection system, which is a city. It starts at the service connection, the sewer main, from manhole to manhole, everything, the covers, everything. Trunks, siphon boxes, pump stations, lift stations, and of course definitely the wastewater treatment plant. So we merge both together, so we have the homeowner service line connecting with the city main. So normally, this is very important right here. What is the responsibility of the homeowner? Well, the owner owns the entire service until it connects to the city main. So if there's a blockage somewhere in the service itself, and if you have to call a plumber, normally a great part of the calls that we get is when the plumber states that the blockage or the issue is encountered right here between, on the city side, which they call, which to be honest, there is no city side. However, if there is a blockage, the plumber has the responsibility of clear that blockage. If it's not related with maintenance, but there's a break in the main, then of course the city will definitely, please contact the city of Raleigh. The city will come and definitely assist the customer if the break seems to be underneath the sidewalk or the street. So that's the point of reference of where they both merge together. Private and public, let's see, those are a couple few examples. Some of the homeowners are connected to sewer on the street. Other homeowners have it behind or between their properties. There we go. There's another example of a lot of things that happen. For example, out of sight, out of mind. There's a lot of vegetation. I got some bushes, some trees that were planted on top of a sewer main, or your service definitely, on top of your service. So what it seems to happen, eventually as time goes by, that tree will definitely grow, and it will cause infiltration, and it will break your service, and all the roots are going to go in. Eventually, it's going to start breaking your sewage, and they're going to feed from the sewage itself. That tree is going to grow up to the point where those roots are so big, they're going to block entirely your service. For example, here's another example of what does it look like when there's a lot of grease. That's another thing that we encourage, even though they were in our first message. It was that do not pour any fats, oil, or grease into the sink itself. Eventually, as time will pass by, it will accumulate and it will turn as hard as concrete, as a rock. And then you will have to get a certified plumber to come in and replace the entire fixtures of your service, even probably coming from the property itself. Well, there's different reasons for service blockage caused by accumulation of debris. It's a homeowner's responsibility. Please contact a certified plumber. Most of the time it's like I called somebody that knows somebody that has done it before. We encourage most likely a professional that knows exactly what they're doing, and of course they have the liability to address any concerns if it comes to that point. Service breaks are caused by pipe failures, plumber confirmed through CCTV, that it's in the right of way. So this is the part normally that the city will call. Well, you will contact the city. There is a problem in my property. I have a blockage. My certified plumber is on site, and they have recommended that this issue, which is not a maintenance because I can address it, it's my responsibility, but the pipe is broken underneath the sidewalk or the street. Well, normally what we would recommend, we will definitely dispatch a crew to go and perform some investigation, but one of the things that the plumber is recommended to do is capture how was he able to determine where exactly the issue was and the location of the issue itself. That way, once they show our footage, we can see exactly the pinpoint the location itself and the magnitude of the damage itself. So normally, that's normal flow, the first picture. The other one's a little bit restricted for X reason. Partial complete rupture, so there's something could be caused by a root of a tree or got damage from the top. A vehicle was so heavy that run on top of my service and it started breaking the service. And up to the point, it's not spilling out there, but it's not flowing as is intended to. Up to the point, as a matter of time, it will not fix by itself, so it's going to be an offset joint, eventually causing all the sewage to go to the ground. So normally, a couple few things that we like to recommend our customers or our residents, it's like, for example, a lot of them recommend, well, like, contact a certified plumber. Oh, that is great. And they came and snaked my service. Better something than anything, right? But eventually, that's just putting a patch into an injury. If you really want to fix the problem itself, what we recommend is jet your service. It's a jetting clears and cleans the sewer line. On that one, it will pop a hole within the blockage, enough to cause some release and for you to continue using your sewage. But it's just a matter of time for that to be blocked again, and eventually we're going to be back on the same spot where you guys were at the beginning. But if you do request a certified plumber to utilize the jetter to flush the main, of course the entire diameter of the pipe will be properly cleaned.
What should you never put in a toilet? Cotton balls and cotton swabs. Oh no. Paper towels don't break down. Dental floss. Facial tissue. Will you give another tissue? Flushable wipes. You can flush them, but they won't break down. Band-aids, they stick and they're plastic. Duh. Diapers. If you flush them, they will stop up the pipes. Yeah. Don't throw pills in the toilet because it's bad for animals, bad for good bacteria, and bad for water. Cat glitter, there are sand and clay. Ladies, just don't do it. You know what I'm talking about, but I don't.
That is
Thank you. Those are definitely 10 advice recommendations that we provide. Please do not drop anything to the toilet. What can we do to partner with Protect the City of Raleigh Sanitary Sewer System? Normally, I am responsible for the Eastman Inspection Division here with the City of Raleigh. I only have 11 inspectors, but to serve, which we take pride, 500,000 of customers with the entire system that we have, it's very hard for us to be on different locations at diverse times. But by partnering with all and each one of our stakeholders, our customers, our residents, please give us a call if you ever see any issue like that. We want to take immediate action, correct that problem, and try to find out what caused it. On top of that, there's a $50 incentive program for whoever reports a manhole overflowing, and then they'll capture your information and reward you with $50. So normally, you want to have a certified plumber regularly inspect and maintain your section of the sanitary sewer connection system. Properly dispose of solids, fats, oils, and grease in a trash can, not through the sink disposal or toilets. Immediately report sewer spills or odors. Contact the call center at 919-996-3245, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, the 365 days a year. Every time you wish to call the city, we're definitely going to be there for you. Additional information can also be reached at the city's main webpage. Here we got one last
problem around the metro area. Drains clogging and backing up, and plumbers say flushable bathroom wipes are to blame. Jacqueline Allen live now. Jacqueline, at least one city is now sending out a warning.
Yeah, that latest warning coming from Aurora Water, they're saying that even if these wipes say flushable on them like these, don't do it. Plumbers we talk to say if these wipes clog your drain, it's like flushing money down the toilets.
What we're doing is video inspecting the inside of this sewer line.
Getting to the bottom of a recent sewer backup, Master Plumber Greg Crippen saw something all too familiar.
I'm thinking of sending a thank you note to the people making it.
These days, he says, supposedly flushable bathroom wipes like these keep him in business. The problem's bad enough. Aurora Water just issued this warning that flushable wipes are creating clogs in the city's sewer system. And then there was the famous London fatberg this summer.
But if you're eating,
a 15-ton ball of congealed fat and wet wipes.
Water officials say a lump the size of a bus was blocking the drain.
But one manufacturer, Kimberly Clark, defends its wipes, even posting YouTube videos of testing for disintegration.
We've got some significant breakup of the material.
Kimberly Clark says the real problem isn't its bathroom wipes, it's baby wipes and other non-flushable products people put down the drain. Plumbers we talk to don't buy that. Crippen says he's matched the pattern of what he's pulled out to the wipes on people's toilets too many times.
And I'm not here telling you stop using them. What I'm recommending is just don't flush them. Everybody likes to be clean, and they're great, but they're not so good for going down the drain.
Plumbers tell me the problem is especially bad during the holidays. The combination of more people home, more people using these wipes, and more fat being flushed down the drain means bonus rounds of backups around Thanksgiving time. Reporting live, Jacqueline Allen, 7 News.
So normally that's a presentation. I wanted to break it down. I could be here for hours. I'm going to be on the back if there's any further questions. I got some gifts on the back, some more additional information. If you wish to take a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, I have prints on handouts as well. So any questions, please feel free. Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions or other observations? When I went through the Raleigh Neighborhood College, we had your predecessor, or maybe 2 or 3 predecessors before, come and address us, and they talked not just about flushable wipes, but also garbage disposals, and how bad those things were because all of the ground up plant material got embedded into the grease and helped turn it into concrete. So, do you have anything to say about garbage disposal?
Well, absolutely, it goes back to the place. We really don't encourage anything whatsoever, anything to go into the your service itself. One of the things I like to cook, and I like, if it's not greasy, I don't feel the flavor, I really don't like it. So I have the bad habit of when I cook, I have very bad culture a long time ago, that out of sight, out of mind. So when I was cooking something, it's time to wash the dishes, the pans, everything. So going into the sink and it disappear, right? Well, eventually all that grease, fats, oils, and grease definitely goes into the service. I did cause some damage into my service. I had to get a plumber to come and break the floor and replace it. But eventually I had to be mindful and understand that even though if it was not gonna sit and block my service, eventually it was just a matter of time to cause some damage to some of my neighbors on the long journey. So eventually, once that pipe is clogged in the street, a lot of you may have or may not some manholes in your property. So eventually, if the service or if the city main is blocked around that area, eventually if you do have a manhole around your property, then I'm sadly to say that unfortunately all that dirty, nasty water will be coming out. So very few practices with our children to educate and do the right thing, do not dispose of anything, that will pay on the long run, definitely.
Did
Yes,
you say
ma'am.
a manhole cover on your property? Is that what you said?
Yes, some homeowner, a lot of the, everybody's connected to one way or other. Most of our lines are on the street, but we do have some dedicated easements in where it could go behind or between homeowners' properties. And we also have lines that go through there, and there might be some manholes there as well.
Then the homeowner is responsible for the manhole?
No, normally if something is overflowing, please give us a call. We'll come and address the concern. Yes, yes, ma'am.
What about places like at the one end of Anderson Forest that has thousands of gallons of sewage that dumps out when it rains. Is that going to be taken care of in the near future?
Normally, definitely know that there's a lot of research to try to capture information, historical records, to try to find out the main areas, hotspot concentration areas. On this case, I would imagine that it's one raining event, a weather event for overflows. So normally that's also being looked into. Right now, I don't have that much information, but I could definitely try to get with our CIP inspectors and see where they stand on that, and definitely get with you and convey as a little bit more information on that part as well. But if it's something that we have identified as a concern, so definitely we have a closer look when we know that there's gonna be weather situations or weather forecasts out there, just to keep a close eye into that. Yes, sir?
What happens to all the litter that goes into the storm sewers?
Well, normally a couple.
Leaves and all that along from the curbs, or from the gutters.
The ones from the curves, well, there was two systems at the beginning. One is the stormwater with public works, and the other one's the wastewater. Everything that has to do with sewer, it's most likely confined, everything sealed and closed. If it's something that went from the gutters directly to stormwater, then definitely it at one point feeds directly into the creek or blue line stream. So normally, that will be probably stormwater department to see how they really treat it, making sure that those easements are properly cleared, that those manholes are not blocked. I know one of the things, the recommendations they do is when there's some landscaping being performed, that all the leaves and stuff like that are not disposed on a certain way into the storm drains, because eventually they will be blocking somebody's storm drain system. Yes, ma'am.
We have a property where the next door neighbor in her backyard, that she uses it, but anyway, there's that, when you show the picture of a large, a public collection system where the top of the pipe, I call it, sits up about that high off the ground, and it's so big. And once it rained, and this was about 2 years ago, the cover came off. And the whole, it smelled so bad, it was actually awful. City came out, brought their little heavy equipment over there, and made mud mess with it, and so that just helped the smell, excuse me, worse. And they put the top on the manhole and went right through my property and threw the nasty spitty stuff on a new screen that we had put up.
Ooh.
I called and the lady kept talking to me, I'm gonna make sure you do this and you do that. And after about a month of telephone calls, a gentleman told me that, well, if you wanna come see me, my office is out in Corporation Parkway. You know, like out Newburgh Avenue.
Yes, ma'am.
And what is this office called?
It's the Lake Water Facilities is off of Corporation Parkway. I think it's 3304 Lake Water Drive. But if you can, I apologize for the inconvenience. If you can please get with me at the end of the meeting. I'll definitely find different ways to assist you.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Can you tell me the difference between a drain? Like, is there any difference to put stuff down a drain versus garbage disposal?
The main thing would be not to pour anything into it. One has a purpose of destroying everything and just putting it back to the system at a very small scale. On the other ones, just most likely fluids and everything that you might be able to pour into the system that will go in directly. They both need to be treated with a great level of, I will say like respect, not to throw anything into it, because eventually at the long run, it will be causing major issue into it. But eventually, one, it's more harder for children to throw stuff into it versus the other one, which is the sink and the toilet, as a lot of articles, toys, and stuff like that might be flushed by children, causing a little bit more damage for us to even fix. So normally, they both have they both go to the same place, but it's just a different function of each one of them. One might be more liquid versus the other one might have just solids.
So is it okay to put some food in the disposal or no?
No. Yes, sir.
some cities have banned disposal units. Is your department taking any position on that?
Well, definitely, yes. We have a code enforcement department as well, and normally what they do when we do encounter manholes that are definitely overflowing.
No, I'm talking about garbage disposal units in the kitchen sink.
Well, definitely as the consequences that contribute to any overflow that we might have out there, our code enforcement department does a little bit more thorough research of what contribute to this to happen. So normally if there's an apartment complex that have different facilities and they all have pretty bad disposal units, and definitely they are definitely addressed. But I'm not sure if there might be something in there.
The question I ask is, some municipalities in this country have prohibitions against the installation of garbage disposal units. Has your department taken any position on that?
That, to be honest, not that I know, but definitely that doesn't mean there's something out there. I'll be more than glad to do a little bit more research and get with you at the end of the meeting.
In the past and then back off. You know, about 15, 20 years
Okay.
ago, they tried to ban it, and there's such a public outcry that they let it go.
Oh.
Chapel Hill passed a city ordinance prohibiting the installation of garbage disposals on all new construction. And the attorneys from KitchenAid Hobart flew en masse and filed suit against the city of Chapel Hill and forced them to repeal the ordinance because of the threat of massive litigation. Not that there was anything that they could prove, but the threat of being in court all the time and the expenditure to the city backed away. So that's what you're up against, you know. But definitely, you know, if when the sewer engineers show up to do a presentation, they'll bring a cross section of pipes that are choked with grease and vegetable matter that is all solidified in the pipe.
So, just to understand, it's not good just to trash nothing in the garbage disposal, right? Because at the end, it will get stuck in your home.
Absolutely. The less we give the opportunity for anything to be on the service itself, the better opportunities and odds that we will have that nothing will happen. Yes, sir.
My wife and I had this debate 25 years ago, and what let me win it, that the disposal was only for the stuff that you missed, was when I made her come over to the house with me and help take that pipe apart that was clogged, that had been poured down. And at that point she said, okay, I guess, we'll do it your way. Going under the crawl space was a definite opinion changer.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Do you recommend all houses have backflow valves installed?
Yes, ma'am. I definitely do.
Cause I had a plumber one time look at mine and say, oh, you don't need it because you're not, you know, in the right place on the street to have to do it. It'll just go on downhill from you.
He'll go one very important one. Let's say, of course, we have flush trucks that operate with pressure. And let's say everything goes nice and dandy and there's no issue with our pressure and it will not impact your property. But eventually, just going for a safety aspect, a lot of roaches, insects, snakes, and rats will definitely have an opportunity to go through your service itself if there is nothing on site to prevent that from happening.
Now, so how does the backflow mechanism that she just brought up differ from, there's a backflow mechanism on my clean water in my, you know, connection to the house. I mean, is that the same thing?
No, sewer, that might be one for water, but there's one for sewer itself.
Oh, okay, so there's one for clean water and there's one for sewer.
Absolutely.
How do you find what the sewer one is, if there is any at all?
They might be depending on how long the property was built. A lot of them's been years ago in historical districts. At that point, coding was not as it is right now, so it was not probably a requirement for certain properties, especially those over 80, 100 years old, to have that installed. But now with the new properties, new facilities, new development, that is a requirement that backflow preventer needs to be incorporated. Then of course, if something is to be found out there, normally if we can't see it, well, it's definitely going to be under the ground. Normally, a certified plumber definitely has like CCTV service, which will put a camera underneath the service and they'll drag it from the clean out all the way through until they find if there's one in existence. If not, there's recommended one to be installed.
Is that the one that sits right behind the line coming into?
There's two, you have two cleanouts, which are PVC pipes with little caps on it. So those are just the access point. But normally, the backflow is definitely in the pipe, in the ground. So through accessing that from the cleanout itself, getting a camera in there, then it will identify if there's one existing for the property itself, or if not, then encourage one to be installed at your convenience. Yes, sir?
What age, were they required? Will the 50-year-old house have it, or 60-year-old house have it?
To be honest, I'm not sure if there's a certain date time, but eventually one of the ways that we could find out is let's just get a plumber and have that, your service definitely CCTV, and see if you have one on site. If not, then the recommendation will be out there for you to have one installed at your convenience. Yes, sir?
So you don't know what year while they put that in the code?
That is correct, but I could definitely find out for you. I know there's a lot of information on the city website, but definitely I'll get with Mr. Patrick, and some of your amazing questions, I'll make sure I convey those answers for him. Yes, sir?
Based on the backup that occurred on my next door neighbor a few years ago, they were not required.
They weren't, my neighborhood doesn't have it.
Yeah, normally.
Unless somebody has installed them.
Yeah, absolutely. Normally, a lot of properties are not, it's not like a requirement, but it's some, now it is. But before, most likely, most in the requirement, I see the importance of having one because that will prevent a lot of issues on the long run. Definitely. Any further questions? I'll definitely be here in the back, definitely. If you have any more questions, I'll make sure to respond to all of them.
If you could find out the date, you know, at which it was, when it was required, when it began being required for construction. I think everybody would like to know, because instead of just all of us calling our plumbers and having them bring a CCTV, you know, over to our house, we kind of like to know. So if you want to find that out and get a hold of me, send me
Absolutely.
an email, I can report it at the next meeting.
That'll be perfect.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right. Any other questions? Well, thank you so much. We
My pleasure.
appreciate
Thank you
it.
for allowing me. Thank you.
Okay, next up, Jason from planning with the Midtown St. Albans plan.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Is there a ballpark figure like this? I've talked to people before where I say, is it gonna cost $10 or $1,000 or, you know, or $10,000? Roughly, if you're gonna have them come look with their camera.
Roughly, is this for a price for CCTV camera finding if there's an existing backflow preventer, or for the installation of the backflow preventer itself?
Well, how about just, both?
I really don't know. Depends on the plumber itself. Yeah, normally that will be the plumber. There might be different prices out there to range from.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. In the future, I'd like to request that I not follow public utilities, because as interesting as I sincerely believe city planning to be, I'm not sure it can compete with the bus-sized wad of fat and baby wipes and a video that kind of looked like a colonoscopy. So, I'm going to do my best. Bear with me. Y'all have heard a lot of this before. I am going to go through in some detail a lot of what I talked about last month, because I'm also going to talk about what we heard in the last round of meetings and online survey that many of y'all took part in. So to talk about the results, I also want to talk about, well, what people were commenting on. So here we are in the process, gone through several phases where we started to develop an understanding of what we needed to do, to start to put together ideas and put them out in front of the public and get some feedback on them. And now we're getting pretty close to a final report, which actually we'll be putting out the next month or so, and that will go to city council, and we'll see the last phases of it. Most of y'all are probably pretty familiar with this, but the study area itself overlaps part of the Midtown CAC, also part of the Atlantic CAC. So on the north side, you've got Millbrook Road, Atlantic on the east, Six Forks on the west, and Six Forks and the Crabtree Creek to the south. So this is just one of a lot of data we started the process with. I talked about how the initial phases were really about understanding what the plan ought to look at. So this was some initial feedback we got about top issues. Number one was safety and comfort for people walking and riding a bicycle in the area. That was a pretty consistent theme throughout, and I think you'll also see that in the priorities that people put recently on some of the top projects that y'all wanted to see happen. Also a lot about considering this traffic speed and traffic volume on neighborhood streets. That was one of the reasons for beginning this planning process in the first place. North Hills is developing, the area continuing to evolve, and people asking the question, well, what will that look like in the future in terms of transportation demand and how these trips will be made and where they'll go. Certainly thinking about residential neighborhoods and the scale and respecting that scale has been a pretty consistent theme. Housing affordability, stormwater, I won't go through them all. A lot of significant issues all going into this one planning process. Boil those down into what we call planning principles. Y'all have seen this a couple times, so not going to read through every one of these, but first the idea that transportation is a big part of it. Healthy, safe, reliable, so that's making it more safe and comfortable for people walking and biking, more at least reliability for people driving, more options, so looking more at transit in the future. Midtown living, we heard a need for some different housing options at different income levels, different phases of life, but also while accomplishing that, respecting again the scale of lower scale residential neighborhoods. Yes?
Slide before, over the answer 370 of 614 was that left hand corner.
So yes, the question is the numbers up in the top left. So that was 370 answers. What we see through the surveys is actually question by question. The more questions you put out in front of people on the survey, the less likely they are to go all the way through. So I think 600 people opened up the survey and took a look at it and maybe answered some questions. And we got 370, which is still a pretty big number, that answered this particular question.
Okay. Oh, just for the, okay.
So a couple more of those principles. Midtown green and blue, and that's the idea that we have some great natural spaces in Midtown and they need to be preserved and enhanced. So green being trees and greenways, and blue being streams, Crabtree Creek, the big branch. So not only preserving those, but also looking at ways where we can use those as part of a natural systems, both for stormwater and transportation, a natural systems network that can really take more advantage of these assets than what we're doing right now. Midtown Works, the idea, there's a lot of industrial zoning, especially along the rail line that runs right through this area. And that we've seen a drop in demand for some of those uses, some of those warehouse and light industrial uses. So some opportunities for some more office and housing uses in some of those areas. And then finally, aesthetics, we call that beautiful Midtown, just making sure that future development enhances the appearance of the area. And then again, thinks about transitions in building heights from mixed use areas to lower scale residential. So I've talked about this in the sense that if you understand these 7 big ideas, you can definitely dive into more details of the plan, but if you understand these, you really get the gist of the plan itself. So number 1 is the Beltline crossing. So that is a new bridge across the 440 Beltline in between Six Forks on the west and Wake Forest on the right. And I know there's some questions about where exactly does that connect. I've got a slide a little bit later that shows that, and I'll walk through it. But just the idea of providing a connection so for people driving, they're not necessarily forced to go through the 440 interchanges with Six Forks and Wake Forest. And for people walking, there really is no way to get across 440. Lassiter Mill Road is pretty comfortable. And then if you think about going east from there, I think most people feel pretty uncomfortable or wouldn't try Six Forks, Wake Forest, Atlantic. There's a stretch of several miles where essentially you can't cross it. And it's a pretty big barrier for pedestrians or people trying to get to the Greenway. It's an issue. So what we're calling green streets, which is the idea, especially where, and going back to concerns about traffic volume and traffic speed on neighborhood streets. So this is addressing that by doing a couple of things at once, a significant traffic calming effect by adding some on-street stormwater and greenery and landscaping elements that can catch the rain, can slow down cars on some very wide neighborhood streets, and also provide for some safe spaces for people walking or biking, essentially creating a greenway on the street where it wasn't feasible to create one off the street. A more connected street network. So one of the fundamental characteristics of the area is there's not much of a connected network, and that tends to force all trips to a couple of locations, especially those interchanges. But even apart from that, it's pretty fragmented, and there are definitely some opportunities to create some additional connections. Again, better for pedestrians, better for overall transportation. What I call, you can call this different things, but what I've been calling serious transit. There's actually a lot of transit that goes through Midtown. A lot of it is really low, well, all of it is actually low frequency. So hard to rely on if you're trying to get to work, really for most purposes. So the idea of 15-minute or less series of bus routes, most of these are existing, so talking about increasing the frequency to make it finally for the first time a legitimate option for getting around this area or connecting to downtown or elsewhere in the city. What we're calling the Midtown Ring, this is transportation, but it's all for people walking or biking. So it is a completely separated, whether it's on the greenway or whether it's separated on the street, network of safe, comfortable facilities that connects to really all the major destinations in the area, be they North Hills, the Greenway, the new Wegmans shopping center area, and residential neighborhoods all around there. So for the first time, being able to get to some destinations without having to drive. Also looking at Midtown Living, that theme, some opportunities in a couple places, not as many as are shown right here, where again there's some older uses or where we've sort of specified some height and scale guidelines for certain areas that are likely to see some new development. And then lastly, what we're calling the Midtown Waterfront District and the Waterfront Park concept that I'll show you in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides. So I hope you all will bear with me. If I go too fast, put up a hand and let me know. But I do want to get through these big projects. So we had 16, for those of y'all who were at the meetings or took the survey, we put 16 projects out in front of everybody to get some feedback on what was most important. And I'm going to walk through those and then go through the results that we got. So the Beltline crossing, that's the first one I talked about. It's the biggest in terms of financial commitment of the projects that are in this plan. And one really good request that I had gotten beforehand was to show a little bit more clearly exactly where the bridge might go. So a couple of things here just for orientation. Here's the Beltline, 440, Wake Forest Road. What you see in yellow are planned future streets. They don't exist yet. So some of those are part of, so you can see St. Albans just to the north of that. Some of those are part of what will occur as North Hills continues to develop, and then the property there to the east of North Hills, some additional street connections. So what you see there in that aqua color is the bridge project itself. So essentially connecting, there's an office park over on this side of Six Forks, here's Six Forks Road. So connecting Barrett Drive over 440 to Navajo Drive and the future extension of Church at North Hills, which is one of those yellow streets, and then connecting into that future street network that will happen as those areas are developed. So what that crossing would probably look like, the best way I can think to describe it is a lot like Lassiter Mill Road. So 2 lanes of traffic for cars, and then some wide sidewalks and bicycle connections as well. This ultimately would also be a greenway connection over the Beltline. So that bridge will do double duty in a couple of ways. You can see that this is this small section right there where that connects. That is actually Quail Hollow. It's a separate part of Quail Hollow from the Quail Hollow that runs on a much larger segment to the north. So it wouldn't connect directly to that. You can see at the top, Quail Hollow stops, and there's no, the plan doesn't envision connecting that piece of it. There's a development that would be in the way. There's also some floodplain in the way. However, it does envision creating a greenway connection that would connect that northern section of Quail Hollow down to St. Albans and then all the way across, ultimately going down to the Crabtree Greenway. So one question might be, what would be the benefit of that additional connectivity? And this is something, I used to do it as a quiz, but I'll just tell you. So this is 4 different parts of the city. On the top right is downtown, top left, 5 Points. This is Cameron Village, Overland Village area, and then you see Midtown, and it really jumps out, the lack of connectivity, and that's what, again, makes it really tough. And to get around as a pedestrian, I think why we heard so much about that during this process. And also, again, it focuses car trips on a couple places as well, and that's where you get locations where you get some pretty significant backups. So, walking through a little bit more quickly the rest of these big projects. So the Green Streets I already mentioned, Quail Hollow, Hardin, Bush, and Waketown Road are the big candidates for that treatment, and a couple of examples of what that could look like. The Greenway Connector, so again, going back to a big part of that is the 440 bridge, and using that to get across the Beltline, and then a couple of different options for how ultimately connecting to the Crabtree Greenway. And then to the north, I mentioned the Greenway connection to Quail Hollow, and of course Quail Hollow is one of those green streets as well, so essentially a greenway on the street on Quail Hollow. So in the end, a greenway running all the way from Millbrook Road down Quail Hollow, across the Beltline, and then connecting to the Crabtree Greenway. So access for everybody in that neighborhood on both sides of Quail Hollow to get to the Greenway. The Midtown Ring is actually building on a couple of these things. So it's showing the Quail Hollow on-street Greenway and connection, and then the Greenway connection to Crabtree. And then some on-street, this is Industrial Drive, and then actually a second bridge, which would be just a bicycle and pedestrian bridge across 440 to connect to the area where you've got Wake Tech and the Pinecrest neighborhood, and some more residential on that side of the area. So again, giving a really complete network of safe, comfortable pedestrian bicycle connections for the first time in the area. So this is a couple projects. I lumped them together because they're the same concept, which is creating more of a connected street network. So there's 2 fundamental ways when we think about handling transportation demand. One is you widen the streets. For a long time, that's been more of the first option in the toolkit. But another way is not just widening a few streets, but creating more of a street network, especially where you can, if you've got some areas that are more commercial and are redeveloping. So some connections that I walked through before, but another really key one is extending Six Forks Road from where it stops right now, right at Atlantic essentially, all the way to Capitol Boulevard. So a key connection for people driving, for transit, a pretty big project right there that would be among the final recommendations of this plan. St. Albans Drive, so that exists. The recommendation is to create a 4-lane section where there's some pretty high demand near Wake Forest, and then the rest would be 2-lane with a turn lane, and where you don't need a turn lane, a tree line median the rest of the way.
Jason?
Yes.
You were on TV this week showing a bus rapid transit system, and they were showing some exclusive bus lanes. I see you have buses shown on some of these lanes on these 4-lane roadways. Is that what is proposed here, or is that just in those crosstown corridors that were showing?
No, yeah, so no exclusive busways as of yet. I do have a slide where I'll talk about the transit a little bit more. So the first phase for transit is to just increase the frequency. Let's get that done and see what that translates to in terms of ridership. The plan does recommend a future, what we call bus rapid transit connection, which is where they do typically have their own space on the roads. Essentially, one way of thinking about it is it's like rail on wheels, because they have their own space, they have priority and signals, and it just enhances the speed and the overall level of service for transit. So the recommendation of the plan is, after we increase some frequency, take a look at, is there enough demand for that higher level of transit? And then secondly, if there is, then where would it go? There's several different possibilities for that, so that would be a future study that would take a look at that.
But you said you are considering 4 lanes on parts of, St. Albans Drive, is that just down to Wake Forest Road?
That would be from Benson to Wake Forest, so one block right there. It's likely to see, well, we know that there's development that's likely on really both sides of St. Albans, so handling a lot of that would require some widening there. Yes, sir.
So pretty much all of the activity, all of the traffic that is in that, Wake Forest, Six Forks, St. Albans, Beltline, that entire area, everything in there is gonna have to dump on the Six Forks, or Old Wake Forest Road, on either St. Albans or that new road that you're proposing runs parallel to the Beltline, is that right?
Yeah, so we can go back.
I guess my concern is, there's an awful lot of concentration of activity in that area that you have defined between St. Albans and the Beltline and Wake Forest and Six Forks. And everything that goes on in there now has got to come out of there through about 4 points. Is that right?
Yeah, and so that's a big part of the idea of the bridge crossing that expands basically the options for where those troops can go. Right now they're pretty constrained. You've got St. Albans and that's about it.
St. Albans needs a big improvement, it needs it now, but, so I'm envisioning that road that you're gonna create parallel to the Beltline is gonna be something akin to an interstate highway.
So that would be Navajo on the
Right.
side and then connecting the church at North Hills.
Right?
It would be able, so that's a big part of what I think this illustrates. So if you think about some of these places, there's some pretty intensive land uses, and it doesn't necessarily rely on a whole bunch of highways. It's more that you have different options than just 1 or 2, which is the current condition right now.
Inside there, but getting out and in from that block is my concern.
Yes, sir.
I'm probably the only person here who actually lives in the woods, what used to be the woods of St. Albans. I back onto St. Albans and I see it and hear it on a daily basis. Somehow, you're creating absolute gridlock with all the construction going on currently on St. Albans, with all the hundreds upon hundreds of new apartments being built on St. Albans, with the new senior citizens facilities being built on St. Albans, which was originally called an urban thoroughfare when it was built, I guess, in the 1970s. There is simply no way for that street, which already has bicycle lanes now on either side, to handle this traffic. It's impossible.
Well,
If you're
that's-
creating, I'll never see it because I'm too damn old at this point. I'm 85. I may move into that senior citizens facility. But there is simply no way for St. Albans to handle everything that's being talked about.
Right, it
There's
doesn't
no
need
room
to.
expand it. Of course, you say from that one street there, that's running alongside the North Raleigh Hill. It'll be opposite where Coastal Federal will build its new building. But that's one little street. How about the rest of St. Albans running back, all the way back into the North Hills area? There's no way you can do anything to make St. Albans bigger.
Right, well, that's really the concept, though. It understands that St. Albans can only do so much, but that creating some additional connections, the new road parallel to 440, and then a crossing across 440, so that right now, not everybody has to necessarily go through Six Forks and 440 or Wake Forest and 440, distributes that out. I think the bigger picture is Midtown is, y'all all know this, Midtown is growing and evolving, and it's becoming less of a place that people sort sort of shoot through to go somewhere else and more of a place on its own. And we've certainly heard a hunger for people to be able to walk to destinations as well. And so part of that is making sure that there's connections that safely allow them to do that. And part of that is, as it evolves, you have more of a mix of uses that are closer to each other, so that people aren't necessarily kind of just driving through to get to somewhere else, but maybe it's within walking distance of
They
where
won't
they're
be
going.
walking because they will not be able to drive.
Well, what we found is that, and going back to those principles I talked about at the beginning, talked about reliable transportation, not trying to promise free flow transportation. That is not gonna happen. That's not likely. It will be a lot like it is today. There will be times where it is slow. What we found in looking at traffic projections, and it's what some might call a worst case scenario, because it looks pretty far into the future and assumes a lot of new development. So we wanted to be on the conservative side. And it finds that with these improvements, it essentially stays about the same as is today. In some places, it's a little bit worse. In some places, it gets a little bit better. But overall, about like it is now. But that's just thinking in terms of driving level of service. In terms of transit level of service and certainly pedestrian level of service, those both go up pretty dramatically. Several questions. If it might make sense to go through the rest of these and then take questions, because I do want everybody to have a sense of all these recommendations and then the feedback. I don't want to cheat anybody on the questions, but I do think we have time. I probably have about another 10 minutes, and then we can take all the questions. So the 6 Forks extension, again, that's another example of more connectivity and how we can take our existing street network and make it do a lot more than it's doing right now. St. Albans Drive, 6 Forks pedestrian bridge, that's one that we've heard so much about. This is at North Hills. All through this process, people just don't feel very comfortable or safe crossing this. So looking at a way, it could be a bridge or a tunnel, still some design would need to be done on this, but how you can get across that one connection, which so many people want to. I've heard that people drive across that because they don't feel safe walking. Good example of how some of these improvements can actually reduce some of our driving demand in the area. Neighborhood pedestrian connections, these are places where a full street connection didn't necessarily make sense, but right now you can't really walk, and certainly anyone in a wheelchair can't make these connections. So just making, if you're familiar with this area, this is Bush Street, this is the Pinecrest neighborhood, just essentially a sidewalk connection from the neighborhood street to the larger street. And in some of these cases, this is where we would have the on-street green streets as well. So we want to make sure that those are accessible to people. This is a Pacific Drive connection further north in the area, overpass over the rail line in the future. And again, just one more example of how right now there's so many barriers that funnel trips into a couple places. More connections mean that it's less of a funneling effect. Wake Forest Road improvements. So improvements to the interchanges there at Navajo and at St. Albans, adding turning lanes. We know from hearing from the hospital that they have questions about access, and those are also places where some additional trips are likely in the future. So widening those interchanges does make it tougher for people walking, so that's a trade-off, but handling those additional trips is something that's important too. So this is an example of making sure, again, travel time reliability, maybe not going faster, but at least making sure the conditions don't get worse in the future. Bush Wolfpack roundabouts. This is one where we had a couple options. This is on the east side of Wake Forest Road. One option was to connect Wolfpack Lane. It almost connects to where you can connect it to the hospital area and ultimately to Wake Forest. But we got a lot of feedback from the neighborhood that folks didn't really feel like that was the best way to make that connection. So we revised it based on that. Instead, this is a smaller scale improvement, but adding roundabouts to these existing stop sign intersections. So you do have a little bit more of a free flow of traffic, still comfortable for pedestrians, but an improvement that also respected that neighborhood. there, the Pinecrest neighborhood. I mentioned this before, this is part of that Midtown Ring, but a bicycle pedestrian bridge. And this would do a lot, but one of the biggest connections would be Wake Tech's building to the shopping area right here. So right now, what do they do at lunch or on their way? Well, if you want to get from Wake Tech, which is growing pretty rapidly, to say Wegmans, even though it's just a couple 100 feet, you have to get in your car and you have to go to Wake Forest and you have to go through the interchange. You can also go out Atlantic and come up the other way. It's just a good example of how we've designed things that force you to drive, even if you're really close to your destination. So with some additional infrastructure, and a bicycle pedestrian bridge is a lot less expensive than a bridge that also has cars, can take some of that traffic off of those really heavily used interchanges, and also let people, if they want to, and we heard a hunger to live, for people to live a more active, healthy lifestyle, to be able to walk to destinations that are quite close if you remove the barriers. So a lot of pedestrian crossing improvements, a lot of places where you've got key intersections on Six Forks north of the Beltline, Six Forks south at Anderson, and on Millbrook Road, where again, people want to cross and it just is not safe. And there's a lot that we can do to make that a lot more safe and comfortable. So affordable housing, this is one where we heard from people in process that, you know, if there's anything that we know about this area, it's that there's a lot of demand for it. Home prices are rising. New apartments help with that by adding supply, but they're not exactly affordable either. So heard a lot of concern, and one of the suggestions was to specifically find some land. This is the area near Crabtree Creek. This is Six Forks and Wake Forest. A lot of this is likely to redevelop in the coming years. So for the city specifically to find some property on which some affordable housing could be developed. And I'll tell you the results of that. We asked for input on that particular question, and I'll get to that in just a couple more slides. So land use recommendations, not a whole lot, but in a couple key places, again, where either there's some industrial uses looking to provide more housing opportunities, or where a big transportation improvement like the Beltline Bridge, or where some redevelopment is already occurring, like the area near the Wegmans, looking at specifying what should be the future height and scale in those areas in the future. And also, in a couple of areas that you see there in the yellow with the number 6, those are Millbrook Road and Atlantic Avenue, and the recommendation there is, so those are mostly, you've got some older single-family houses on those very busy, in some cases, roads, and allowing those to evolve into what's sometimes called a missing middle housing type. So in between a single-family house on one hand and a larger scale apartment building on the other. So thinking about a duplex or triplex. A lot of those housing types that are pretty common in older neighborhoods, but zoning doesn't really typically allow anymore, but allowing those to occur at least right along those streets where you have essentially lower demand now for a large lot, single family house on those streets. The Midtown Waterfront Park, so that is one we've heard pretty consistently throughout this process that stormwater is an issue in the area, and there's also some opportunities for public spaces. So this is an area you can think about car dealerships and some vacant lots and some empty parking lots. Kind of been, well, the area's turned its back, I would say, on the creek. But it's actually a great feature, and you have a greenway right there. The opportunity exists to flip that and have that be a primary gathering place, a focal point of Midtown, a waterfront park that would both collect some stormwater before it goes where we don't want it, and also create a situation where we have some urban places next to a water feature, so a true waterfront district in a way that Raleigh really never has had in its history. And I think that's a pretty feasible thing, and I'll talk about the results. So we did an exercise in the meetings with small groups, and people got together and they had 25 Midtown bucks, and you could buy a lot for 25 Midtown bucks. You could buy a bridge and a park, but the thing is you couldn't buy everything. So the intent was to encourage some prioritization and some discussion about, well, why were those the top priorities? Do people want to prioritize more of the pedestrian projects or more of the projects that help get around by driving or public space? And it turned out to be a mix, but I'll go over what we did here. So we had about 70 people in person, and then about 300 people took the online survey. And the top one from all that input was the Six Forks pedestrian bridge at North Hills. I think that's actually pretty helpful input. I think there's been some skepticism about how, from some people, about is this really helpful, but this says, well, a lot of people really would like to see that. Pedestrian crossing improvements, again, that fits with the theme that we've heard, Crabtree Creek Park, and on down the list. I won't go through all of these, and it wasn't to decide which one should go forward. All of these, the planning process found to be good projects, but it was helping ultimately the city council, who's going to make the decisions about funding, helping them understand what residents and stakeholders' top priorities are. So last couple things, I talked about the land use. This was a couple of additional questions that were posed in this last round of input and survey, because we felt like we needed to get a better sense of what people were thinking. So one was looking at the recommendations from the Six Forks plan, and when that process finished up, there was not a lot of consensus on some of the land use recommendations. And when we put those recommendations out earlier this year, again, not a lot of consensus, and in fact a lot of negative feedback on some of those. So this is oriented, by the way, so that north is going to the left. And so the recommendation that came out of the Six Forks plan was for 20 stories in the area that's the old North Hills on the west side. And that was a pretty sharp, well, it wasn't much of a transition at all to the neighborhood there on the other side of Lassiter Mill, and had a lot of frankly unhappy comments about that. So what was revised and then put out for feedback was creating a transition there, so 4 stories along Lassiter Mill, and then scaling up to the 20 stories. And then the question was posed, how well does this meet the plan's overall goals? More housing and employment, but respecting lower scale residential areas. So if you did this, you know there was a little slider. You could say, not very well or very well, and ultimately 69% of people thought that it at least did it 50% well or better. So that's the feedback that we got on that. And then one other question we asked about, again specifically in addition to those projects, was another element of the Six Forks plan that had a lot of negative feedback at the time and then earlier this year, which was some street connections that were proposed in the area of Carroll Middle School. And those street connections, they do have a lot of potential value in making it more accessible for people to walk to destinations. On the other hand, there was a lot of concern about what would that mean for people in those streets. Could those streets, were they suited for those connections? And ultimately the recommendation was to not include those connections in this process, but in the future to have some more specific study of those connections. Should they be made? If so, should they be pedestrian only, or should they be pedestrian cars? And also at the same time, because it's the same area, to take a look at the situation on Rowan Street right now, especially in the morning and afternoon when school is at Carroll Middle School or St. Timothy, is people are arriving or leaving, and you get a lot of backups on streets where people are parking on the street because they can't line up on the property of the school, and causes some conflict. So some study on both of those issues was the recommendation. And then, so the question was just, does that make sense to remove them now and do some study? And 71% thought that reasonably made sense. So, about to go back to questions. So the last steps for this plan are to take that feedback and create a final report on the recommendations that we just walked through. That will be out this month, or excuse me, November. We'll have some comments on that, so there will be a month for people to take a look at that, because I know it's one thing to go to a meeting and there's a whole bunch of boards that take a while to walk through, or to hear me go through a lot of slides kind of fast. So it's helpful if you're really into this to take a look and read through the report and understand the thought process and see, does that make sense, or do you have some comments? once we get those comments, there can be some adjustments made based on that. Ultimately, in January, it gets delivered to the city council, and they will refer it to the planning commission, which will have some meetings, opportunity for input. Everything highlighted in blue is an opportunity for more input, then refer it to council. One thing I will mention before I totally wind up is a big part of those last few steps where it goes to the planning commission and then back to council is they're gonna wanna hear from what was called the confirmation group, which we have a couple members in attendance today, and the charge of the confirmation group was to make sure that these final recommendations line up with the input that was received throughout the process. And ultimately, they would report to council that it aligns with that or it doesn't. They would confirm that the plan is responsive to the input. So, that's all I had, and I think I saw a question or two.
Yes, you had spring 2019.
Oh, that should be 2020. Yeah, has anybody ever done that? And you're not, especially a big one like 2020, that just sounds really weird. I think my brain must have said that can't be a thing. Yes, 2020.
Jason, 10 minutes.
Thank you. So, yeah, I'm ready for questions now. Yes, Ted.
Just looking at the public transit that you are going to have it more frequently running, but it seems like the real congestion concerns occur during rush hour when people are going to and from work. And if we run the buses more frequently, if they don't go to the right destination, that's not going to do us any good. So it seems like the transit ought to be a regional thing. And is this Midtown St. Albans transit going to hook into a larger system that will make a dent in that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it has one frequent route that would go to NC State Centennial Campus and one that would go to downtown. Those are two of the bigger destinations to and from Midtown. And both of those would connect to what we're calling the bus rapid transit network that I addressed earlier about the question about buses with their own space. So that is something that's happening from downtown in every direction. There's a bus rapid transit corridor that's being planned. So north along Capitol Boulevard, ultimately maybe the Triangle Town Center, east out to Wade Med, and possibly beyond to Knightdale in the future, west out to Cary, downtown Cary, and then south to Garner. So both of those Midtown connections would connect to that bus rapid transit network. And again, what that looks like is where buses, for the most part, have their own space on the roads and have priority signals. So a pretty high frequency and high quality way to connect to more regional destinations. Yes, sir, Larry.
Most of my questions again revolve around the land use recommendation. I see in almost every survey that they put out, they ask about tiering building heights from the roadway and back in. And then you got a major road like 6 Forks. And all of a sudden they got the 20-story buildings right back on 6 Forks Road. They're not tiered. I can understand they went 3-story, 5-story, and up in the back. So why did the Midtown plan come back with still leaving 20-story buildings right on the roadway?
It's a good question. So it's contextual would be my answer. So it doesn't recommend 20 stories at all everywhere on 6 Forks. Just in a couple areas where that context is basically already established by what's across the street. So
that's the point, it's across the street.
Right, so 20 stories, so you have, well, at North Hills, you have 20 stories right up at the street on one side, and then the other side, the old North Hills side, is zoned for 12, but obviously it's, right now it's a lot lower than that. But the recommendation then is to basically reflect that 20-story height on the other side of the street, but then scale it down as you get to neighborhoods. So, but on other parts of 6 Forks, so as you get north from there, the height drops and doesn't go up until you get to Millbrook, and then it's just 5 stories. And then as you go south, that's a more, south of 440, a much more residential feeling part of 6 Forks. On one side you have the office park that I talked about, but on the other side you have basically single family residential. And so the recommendation there along that part of 6 Forks is just for 3 stories on that other side. So I guess just the context determining where it was reasonable to have a little bit more, or a lot more height, and where it was more imperative to respect the scale, the lower scale. That's what drove it more than anything, is thinking about the residential scale.
Question.
Yep,
yes, sir.
6 foot widening, you didn't mention anything like that, it's not in your list of presentation
Yeah.
of materials, so is that happening, or what's the deal with that?
Yeah, that's happened. That's a great question. I should have probably mentioned that as part of the presentation, because it is really important to understanding the overall vision and how some additional transportation would be handled. So Six Forks, and that was part of the previous process, which is why I didn't talk about it too much here, but the plan is to widen Six Forks all the way from the Beltline up to Lynn Road to a consistent 6 lanes and handle a lot of the, well, I mean, everybody knows there's additional development that's occurring in the area, so handle that new transportation demand. That project is happening and actually is funded, and I believe the design is gonna begin later this year, so there will be a phase of design and engineering that will take, I'm told, probably more than a year, probably 15 months. Then some right-of-way will need to be acquired in some locations, so that's not ever really a quick process, so probably another year and a half. But following that, and the city already has funded through a 2017 transportation bond, money to construct that part of Six Forks. So as soon as the design and engineering and right-of-way acquisition is complete, then construction can begin. It will be disruptive. However, it will handle a lot more trips than it does right now. And the design also includes a tree line median, so there's some aesthetic components as well, and some improved bicycle and pedestrian spaces on Six Forks itself. So some, not on the street. I think once you get to 6 lanes, it's very unrealistic to think that someone would ride a bicycle on the street, and the existing sidewalks are pretty narrow too. So much wider bike path / sidewalk on both sides of Six Forks.
And they want 6 lanes.
Yes, it would be 6 lanes, where it isn't 6 lanes now, it would be 6 lanes all the way to Lynn Road.
I'm gonna have to interrupt and state, okay, you will be back in November, correct?
Am I invited?
Of course, you're invited to every meeting. So
I would be glad to be back.
Good. I think we can continue this discussion then, but let me ask, where will people be able to see, don't leave yet, we've got another topic. Where will people be able to see hard copies of this?
So all this information and more is on the project page. If you search for a Raleigh Midtown plan, it'll take you there, or if you're on the city's website and search for Midtown, it'll take you there. So a lot of information about the input that we've gotten and the recommendations. And then I really want to draw your attention to the final report. Again, that will be published in November, and it will be a great way to take it in all at once with a lot more context. But again, if you want to dive into it now, this stuff is already on that project page.
But will there be hard copies, like people who, you know, when you squeeze some of these pages into a computer screen, hardly anything is visible.
We can do that. I would just ask what would be the best way to make those available. So in the past, sometimes with products like this, we've put copies at libraries or community centers. We could certainly do that. I could bring some to the next CAC meeting if that's something that would be desirable. I mean, there's a cost to printing, but I think it would be very reasonable to have some of those available.
I think, you know, it was helpful to have them at the libraries and the community centers in this area, obviously, but the area is pretty big, like Green Road and Optimist and, you know, the North Regional Library, so that would be helpful. And if you can get some printed that you could bring here, we could pass them around.
We'll do that.
Okay, great. So you are invited back in November, and we don't have a bunch of other things clamoring for attention. I still haven't seen the actual publication of zoning change requests for coastal, for example, unless that went up today. So I don't think we're going to have other zoning things to worry about. So I think you're very welcome to come back in November 25th. we do want to enable our newly elected District A City Council person to address the group, Patrick Buffkin. And while he's approaching, I just want to say on Thursday, November 19th, I think it's a Thursday. Is that a Thursday? Is that a Friday?
Patrick, we have 2 minutes left.
Yeah, okay, I'll shut up. There's gonna be a transit forum on the 19th of November, sponsored by Midtown Raleigh Associates. Call them, Google them to find out something about it.
Thank you, Patrick, and good evening. My name is Patrick Buffkin. Many of you I know and recognize. I want to let you know that 5 weeks from tonight, I'll be your District A City Councilor. Looking forward to working with you all. We got a lot of really great opportunities in this Midtown St. Albans plan, and lots of opportunities all across the city. And please feel free to reach out. I'll be back with you every chance I'm able at these meetings, but I'm not hard to find. If I don't make it, feel free to give me a call, get in touch on online, whatever. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, any other business announcements? Okay, 1 minute, 1 minute. Any questions? Okay, right now, the main topic for the November 25th meeting will be a continuation of the discussion of the Midtown St. Albans plan, because the other zoning changes that people have approached us with have not been filed. They are not out there, so we can't review them. But I think that we've got enough to talk about with Midtown St. Albans. Please come back Monday before Thanksgiving, Monday night before Thanksgiving, the 25th, right here at your favorite meeting room. So thank you all for coming. Good night. Meeting adjourned.
Come get your